Sure. Um, Hello, my name for you all who may not know me is Sarah Hutchison, and I have worked with the Center for European Studies at UNC since 2002. And I'm so pleased that you all are with us today, presenting, attending, participating on a Saturday to listen to these different perspectives that we feel have been underrepresented in contemporary European studies and feel that they need a voice, and of course want to think about why some of these perspectives and individuals and experiences have not been given the attention they need. So I really want to commend you for being here and being a part of this event. So Jalen and Kellen and I, as Tracy explained in his welcome remarks, worked on an article for Diversity Abroad about, I don't know, a year ago maybe. And it was really Kellen and Jalen who had the idea for this conference because we enjoyed working together so much that we just didn't want to let each other go. So I have just been along for the ride and have really been thrilled to see how the event has emerged, and we've been able to work together and bring in so many different kinds of voices, and really got a response out of the gate with your proposals that thrilled us. So Tracy also mentioned that we would like to continue this event into the future as an annual offering. So if you're not presenting today, or even if you are, think about that for next year. Yeah, so I primarily work at the center with the TAM program and then also with undergraduate students. And as we were planning this conference, I used to work with Kellen when she was a student, but now she's graduated. And she made a comment that really resonated with me, that she said, you know, I wish as I was studying Europe when I was younger that I knew that Rembrandt painted Black people. And I thought, oh, that's what this conference is about. It's about rectifying what we've realized along the way and wondering why we weren't exposed to that way back when. And if we do a good job with these conferences, we won't need to have them anymore because we'll bring this to the fore and this will be part of the canon. There's also a TAM grad from 2005 named Leslie Small, and he works in Georgia on voting rights, and his wife, you probably know her, is Nikema Williams, and she's a US Congresswoman. And he talked recently on an alumni panel about how when he approaches his work, you know, and different situations in his life, he wants to think about immediately out of the gate, who's been left out, who's not here, how can I get them here, how can I make sure that they're heard. And he said that it's the EU that inspires some of his work, because the way the EU works and the way the EU makes decisions and votes, it has to be unanimous. So that gave me goosebumps too, because I don't think of him as someone who's working in an international capacity anymore. He works on Georgia and voting rights in the US, right? And yet his training in the TAM program informs what he does every day. So anyway, that's why we're here. That's why I'm here. And I love us. I am really happy that we get to hear in our lunchtime session from two TAM grads. One is going to be our second keynote speaker of the day, and they are going to talk to us about career paths that we may not think about immediately coming out of a training with European studies. And so we shift now to sort of a practical moment in the discussion. And Lauren Gaillard is one of our grads from 2017, and I have just loved working with her when she was a student and staying engaged with her now that she's a grad in Berlin, and has been just so helpful to us, being willing to jump into alumni panels. Did a session recently with our undergraduate working group, WRESTLE, working group on refugees in Europe and service learning, and is just such an inspiring person and is so open, Lauren, about the way you talk about your experiences and your work, and I really appreciate that. So she is the TechStart program coordinator at Code University in Berlin, and she is going to talk to us. Her presentation is called Voices That Carry Across the Pond. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right. Great. I hope it loads. Okay, great. All right. So thank you for having me. My presentation is titled, as Sarah said, Voices That Carry Across the Pond. And it's about finding one's voice in the workforce. And I want to speak to you today with a more storytelling vibe, a storytelling feel. And it's based on what I've experienced growing up and also what I see on the ground in Europe, in Germany specifically, in society and in the workforce today. So before you go to the next slide, there is a globally systemic discrimination of people of color and forced migrants who are therefore underprivileged and underconsidered in various aspects of life. Though this may be understood and faced at an early age for some, sometimes it isn't until one enters the workforce that they are confronted with such underrepresentation and underconsideration. And in my personal and work experiences, I've seen that this has a significant impact on how people of color and forced migrants perceive themselves and their capability to succeed in society at large. This is directly related to how society perceives and treats us, thus affecting our access to jobs, having equal opportunities, finding our voices, and having the platforms and courage to speak up for and accept what we deserve. Next slide. So, hi again, I'm Lauren Gaillard, University Program Coordinator for TechStart. It's a program which accelerates people with a migrant or forced migrant background into the digital workforce in Berlin, Germany. I'm honored to be here to share my perspective and generally to discuss underrepresented jobs and underconsidered topics in contemporary Europe. I will speak more specifically about forced migrant populations in the tech industry in Germany and anecdotally share with you my story, how I found the courage to define my identity, voice what I deserve, and empower others, forced migrants in this case, to do so as well. My hope is that you too are able to reflect on how and whose voices are important, in what ways identity plays a major role in your journey finding a job, and how your voice or the voices of others just might be able to carry across the proverbial pond. Underrepresentation and underconsideration for topics and jobs requires, in my opinion, acknowledging the importance of empowerment, finding one's voice, and following one's intuition. This is my story. Next slide. This is my mom. Can you go back? I'll get to my dad in a second. Okay, this is my mom. She's white, named Karen, but not a Karen. She was born in Germany, but grew up in Arkansas and North Carolina. She married my dad and became a nurse. Okay, now you can click. This is my dad, Black Gullah Geechee, it's like Creole, from James Island, part of Charleston, South Carolina, and a classical and jazz musician and teacher. My identity started immediately, before I was even born. Married in the 80s, having 2 brown kids in the early 90s in South Carolina, an especially racist and socially segregated place at the time, with around 33% of the population Black and 69% white. My parents believed that this was not the most comfortable place to raise a Black and white mixed race family. But the values they taught me included: be your best at anything you do. Don't talk back. That was a hard one. Work hard. Feel beautiful because you are. And a more problematic one: practice until you're perfect. This gave me a sense of purpose. I had no clue what the purpose of the sense of purpose was, but it worked. I made great grades, played sports, did musicals, accepted paid gigs playing the French horn by the time I was 16, tutored math, and gave music lessons. This became my identity, not race. But I was confronted with the fact that my skin color affected how others perceived me and how I was treated. This occurred throughout my life, seeing as I grew up in mostly white, well-educated spaces, like when I had to sit and wait for my dad at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington, whilst he gave brass lessons and taught as an adjunct lecturer. I recall always being so bored when waiting for him, but the smell of the hallway and the sound of jazz music and the pride I felt walking down those hallways with my father is still so vivid in my memory. It's as if it were yesterday. I felt proud of him, and I thought it was because he was really good at what he did and who he influenced. Small town kids who needed a way out, something he knew a little too well. But I was perhaps at the time unknowingly proud of him for being so vocal about getting what he deserved, as he knew he deserved to take up space and speak out as an educated Black man in higher education, spaces that were for mostly white, wealthy people. He played classical music in the symphony, for goodness sake. So how is that relevant? And where does contemporary Europe come into play? We'll get there. But first, my mom. She was and is my everything. It's cheesy, but it's true. She and my dad knew that my brother and I needed a good education and access to resources that could positively shape our lives, putting us in the right positions to grow up as caring, self-reflective, hardworking people that could go anywhere in life. My mom was the one who pushed for us to go to private school when we were in elementary school. It was an all-white school apart from my brother and me, but we managed, not thinking too much about it, though I must say it was a hard left coming from a different elementary school in a small town with mostly Black, economically disadvantaged kids. But the truth is, there weren't academic resources to challenge students intellectually. I missed riding the school bus most because I got to sit with my best friend, Shaniqua Green, my last Black best friend. I was 6 years old. This wasn't the fault of my mother or my father, though. It was the fault of the system, of history, and of racism in the United States for centuries. So instead of letting this harsh reality define my brother and me, my parents made sure to keep our minds sharp outside of school, showing us that there is more to life than racism and segregation. My mom spoke of Germany a lot, and her German teacher in high school, Mrs. Whitey. And my dad would always say a few phrases in French like, "Excusez-moi, s'il vous plaît," and take us back home to James Island and to visit his family where they spoke Gullah and cooked amazing food. But this lack of hard focus on race eventually left me in a space where I had to figure out who I was in relation to others who put me down, who treated me differently, not giving me opportunities as easily as they did to white people. I had to take a good look at race and where I fit in on that spectrum. And I wasn't sure where I belonged for the longest time. What color was I? What words was I supposed to use to correctly describe myself? White and Black? Biracial? Half Black? But of course not say I was half Black, half white, since white is the norm. Where did I fit in at school? What about when I got to college? I applied for and got into 5 universities, but chose UNC Chapel Hill. Could I join the Black Student Union there, though? Should I stay in my own lane and not do anything, not join anything? Next slide, please. I felt muted. I felt like no one could see me or hear me, or that my voice mattered, especially in the Black community. I didn't feel like I was enough. And it wasn't all of a sudden, it was my whole life. But it was underneath all of the other ways I did feel like I was enough. I felt myself most when I didn't focus on race, because I always felt like I was much more. From seeing other smart, affluent Black people at college, to experiencing marches and silent protests after various murders of young Black men like Trayvon Martin, I realized that I needed to focus on race. It did dictate quite a few things about my life and the lives of others, clearly. It's a systemic issue, and one that I began to see was obviously affecting me. I might have felt muted, not Black enough, not worthy enough to join the Black Student Union, but why? And why did it take so long for me to recognize that I had to step up and do something about it, about these injustices? I was actually mad at myself, but I soon learned to confront it. I began doing so on my own terms and at my own pace, something I recommend all of you to do. Next slide, please. So I decided to go abroad, finally to Germany, to see this place and learn the language my mother spoke to me about for years. I wanted to find out more about her story and how it related to me. I had grown up visiting Charleston and James Island, not as much as I would have liked, but wanted to see all aspects of the stories both of my parents told my brother and me, and the values they instilled in us. in order to find out what exactly it was that I had to say as a Black American woman. Ironically, it took me going to Europe to begin this discovery. But once in Berlin, I was quickly taken aback as I was mistaken for Turkish by a German-Turkish couple in Steglitz. Rose-colored glasses shattered. And if you don't know where Steglitz is or what it's about, it's a bit of a, I would say, conservative place. I realized that something was up. All I had seen before were white Germans mostly, and lots of international students in pictures and in my neighborhood. So why and how was this German-Turkish couple thinking I was Turkish? I wanted to learn more. And this is when it clicked for me. Next slide. I felt empowered. I realized that this was bigger than me and broader than just my personal story. It was more than about finding my voice. It was about finding and empowering the voices of others who may once have felt like me. So I went home to the US and decided to study politics for my master's degree in transatlantic relations, focusing on migration and the trade deal between the EU and Turkey during the migrant crisis of 2015. I went back to Berlin for my second year of my degree and had a course at Humboldt on refugee politics in the EU. And the most interesting part was not the lecturer who was working in the foreign ministry as a consultant on the matter, but rather my co-students who were a mix of Europeans, Americans, and refugees from various countries. I got a firsthand account of the experiences of our entire cohort and saw who everyone was, who refugees were, people just like you and me, but they just happened to have come from a situation requiring them to flee their countries and be given the title asylum seeker or refugee. Discrimination was inevitable for them, and it wasn't fair. And this experience started to define what kind of work I wanted to do. I had been keeping a main focus on race with an interest in refugee politics, but as I became more aware of the normalcy of refugees being human and solely discriminated against due to societal views, well, wow, could I relate? This feeling of not belonging, but being just as smart as others, the feeling that you've got to overprove yourself just to be taken seriously, accepted for the job, or seen as something other than the other. I knew from that moment on that I wanted to focus more broadly on the topic of underconsidered peoples in underrepresented jobs. And diversity, that term expanded for me. It became more than race. It became seeing equality across all people from disadvantaged backgrounds. I knew this field of work was and is where I should stay. And being in Berlin, I was learning even more German, starting to feel like it could be home, starting to be seen less first as American and more so as Black. I accepted it. I loved it. Black American became my identifier, and that's all I needed to say if someone asked. Unless they asked and they followed it up with this dreadful question, no, but where are you really from? You know if you know. I found my voice across the pond. I took on various random jobs, one at New York University, their Berlin campus, where I organized a Black student union, led a film screening on Audre Lorde discussing the intersectionality of race and gender, and got more involved in the Afro-German scene, finally making more Black friends and attending diversity and curly hair conferences. I was only a resident assistant at NYU Berlin at the time, but clearly that was enough to get me started. And this was all beginning to come full circle, and I knew I was on the right track. So several jobs later, every time being the only person of color and the only American, I eventually landed a position at Code University of Applied Sciences. About 8 months in, someone approached me and asked if I would be interested in co-running this Tech Start program. They said I'd get to help accelerate migrant and forced migrant background students to enter the tech industry. My initial reaction was, tech? Huh? I barely know anything about this field. I don't know. I never considered tech before. But then my next thought was, wait a minute. Oh my God, wait, yes, I get to help other underprivileged people find their voices. I get to be the platform they need. But I just calmly said, yes, that'd be lovely. When can I start? So I didn't know where I fit in on the spectrum of race. I felt muted. Who wanted to hear what I had to say? I felt underconsidered for so many jobs and saw how underrepresented I was as a female, an American, and a Black person. So accepting the position with TechStart was the first time I felt someone had given me an equal opportunity. I felt empowered and as if my voice mattered. And now was my chance to share this with others who in their own ways might feel similarly to how I felt, not heard, not enough, and underrepresented in jobs. So this was my story. Next slide, please. But working with forced migrants in higher education and helping them enter the workforce has led me to see not just the social discrimination that they face, but also the harsh realities of the numbers that prove how they are not set up to succeed when applying for and getting skilled jobs. These TechStart students are mostly qualified skilled workers from their home countries, and yet they are excluded from skilled jobs in the labor market in fields where they should be given equal opportunities. This is part of their reality and part of their story. Next slide. And next slide. The current situation in Germany with regard to forced migrants having access to skilled jobs is poor, but it is slowly improving. So before this migrant crisis, those with a forced migrant background had difficulties applying for and being qualified for the same jobs that they may have had in their home countries. So this data shows that in 2018, anyway, before the arrival of these forced migrants, 85% of them had professions considered to be skilled jobs. And yet after their arrival in Germany, only 57% of these same forced migrants had skilled jobs. This de-skilling shows that there was a decreasing amount of forced migrants who had skilled jobs once they arrived in Germany, and an increase in number of forced migrants who were then becoming employed in these so-called helper jobs. So who is considered a skilled worker and what is a helper job? I'll tell you. So it's according to the Federal Ministry of the Interior and Community in Germany. The Skilled Immigration Act states that skilled workers are nationals of non-EU countries who have successfully completed quality vocational training in Germany or have a foreign occupational qualification, which is relevant to one acquired in Germany, or, it's a long definition, who have a German or a foreign higher education degree, which is recognized or otherwise comparable to a German higher education degree. And a helper job is considered to be jobs like custodians, dishwashers, trash men and women, to name a few. Next slide, please. So forced migrants are mainly doing manual labor jobs and are underrepresented in jobs that require any analytical skills, jobs such as the ones we can see in the tech industry. It's basically what you can see in this slide. So next slide, please. But over time, since, as you can see here in 2013 until 2019, but still today, we've seen a slow but steady increase in migrants getting more skilled jobs, which is great. Next slide. And that is why TechStart exists. The purpose of this TechStart program addresses the current situation that we just saw. Next slide. So there is a low number of forced migrants in the tech industry in Germany and a lack of access. And yet there is a high vacancy of jobs. So these students in TechStart, they are disadvantaged, they're not taken into consideration for certain job positions, and they're not given opportunities due to their inequivalent qualifications. Next slide. But with the right opportunities, network, and academic support, TechStart helps bridge that gap, which is what you can see here. So next slide. So out of 22 students that were admitted in this first year of the program from over 12 different countries, you can see this alludes directly to what we just discussed. 68% of them already had degrees. And that spans up to PhDs, by the way. So they should be considered qualified skilled workers. And though some may have had jobs in certain areas considered to be skilled, they may not have felt fulfilled, accepted, or challenged. Next slide. They may have felt muted. Those who entered our program stressed how defeated they felt how they just needed this opportunity and wanted to really do well in their careers and in Germany. So after 5 months, 3.5 of which were studying at the university, at Code University of Applied Sciences, 5 of our students have already entered the workforce in tech. So, and now, next slide, they feel empowered. While several have already entered the workforce, other students are currently in the process of interviewing for jobs and internships, or they're continuing to study at the university at this time. And it's a blessing to know how impactful this program has been in their lives. Next slide. What is the impact exactly? A few students had to say a few things like, programs like Tech Start are so important for people like us. There are not many chances like that out there. And I got out of the program what I wanted. For me, it was really successful. And my favorite, thank you so much. This program changes my life. You are the best. Next slide. So they feel heard and they felt heard. Their voices, just like mine, were once underconsidered. They were underconsidered for certain jobs. They are underrepresented in jobs as forced migrants, but they are changing that story. They are changing those statistics, and their voices are carrying across the pond. Does yours? I challenge you to reflect. Next slide. Thank you. Next slide. In case you want to contact me, you can. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren. This is so inspiring. It's just so awesome. We are going to hear from another TAM grad now, Tobin Williamson, who wants to share his screen. So let me do that.
Hey everyone, thank you.
Let me quickly just introduce you. Sorry, from
Sure.
TAM class of 2013. Tobin is an advocacy manager with the Maine Immigrants' Rights Coalition and part of the Aspen Institute's Rising Leaders program. He's also held positions in U.S. congressional offices and at consulates general, and he is going to talk about underconsidered careers today. You have been such a wonderful and engaged TAM grad. Thank you, Tobin. Coming, I think driving, one whole day or 2 whole days to a DC event one time, showing up for alumni panels to speak, and we really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. I certainly love the TAM program, and I'm always happy to, reach out to you guys and share my experience or anything like that. So just checking, can you all see my screen okay? Okay. So yeah, so when I heard about this conference, I saw it posted, I thought, it was a really cool idea. And hopefully there's at least one person in this audience today that, kind of my story will resonate a little bit. So first, a bit about me. I grew up in rural Arkansas. I come from a single parent household. My mom was a teacher. We were never like hungry level of poor, but we weren't a wealthy family by any means. My mom had never been on an airplane. I'd never left the South before college. My travel experience before I started college was a beach trip to Alabama once, and then I had like an academic competition in Nashville. And so, it's quite different from a lot of the folks that you might know that choose to enter careers in, foreign policy or diplomacy or things like that. So how the heck did I get interested in it? And then throughout this presentation, you'll see little pictures and anecdotes of me. So that's me on my graduation day a few years ago at UNC. But so for kids like me that don't have that sort of exposure to what does a career in foreign policy look like, it may seem like you're only limited to like being a diplomat or serving in an intelligence sector or working in academia, doing something in the foreign government. And so if you're not exposed to a lot of foreign policy careers when you're young, like if you grow up in rural Arkansas, or if you come from an underrepresented household in an urban area, or whatever the case may be, if you don't know what's out there, you might not really fully understand. Like, you don't have to have a career in one of those sectors to have a career that involves international relations. And so These photos are from our TAM trip in when I was my first year in TAM, when we went up to DC and saw things like the World Bank and the White House, and it was a great experience. And so, like I said, not everyone follows that path. And why not? Well, first of all, a lot of the entryway into that sector involves unpaid internships. You know, Congress has gotten better about it over the years about paying their interns, but there are still a lot of congressional offices that don't, have unpaid internships. Like, oh, you'll get credit or you'll get valuable experience. That's great. But rent in DC apartments is like $2,000 a month, and so how do you do that without families monetary or financial support? And if you're like me, or if you come from other impoverished households, like you can't do that all the time. And so a lot of State Department internships are unpaid, and so it can be really daunting. Another reason a lot of folks don't enter that traditional route include you want to be in a specific location. It seems like when I was first researching graduate schools and kind of career potential, it seemed like everyone that was involved in foreign policy was either in DC or Brussels or Berlin. And it's true, a lot of folks do live in those areas, but you might have family obligations in Ohio or Arkansas, or you may have a spouse that gets a job offer in Florida or Tennessee, and like you have to figure out, like, well, I can't work for the State Department if I need to take care of some family issues in Missouri or something. And so you have to be able to adjust, like, what kind of careers can you still have an international component in, but not be in one of those big the centers like DC or Brussels or Berlin. And finally, a lot of times you just don't get accepted into those sorts of jobs. Becoming a diplomat is tough. Becoming an intelligence officer is really hard. And that's fine. It happens. That's the job market in these careers. And, I've been unsuccessful in my job applications before in the past. I know a lot of other people are as well. Sometimes it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times trying to, join an intelligence service or join the foreign service. And so in the meantime, you still have bills to pay. You still have, stuff that you have to take care of. And so, my talk just kind of sheds light on what you can do instead if you don't join the federal government, if you don't, join the foreign service, things like that. So and just talking a little bit about that, there are a lot of private sector opportunities that are available. One of my best friends from the TAM program, he's several years older than I am, but he's been a mentor of mine for a long time. He works for Lufthansa, the German airline. And it seems like every week he's traveling all over the world in an amazing new location. Like this past week, he was in Portugal, and he was just in Germany. And he's all the time going to these amazing places, and he works for a German airline. Who would have thought it? One of my classmates from the TAM program now is some sort of analyst for Facebook, which, that's not diplomacy, but she used her research skills that she got in TAM to go on to get a PhD, and now she's working at one of the world's most powerful countries. One of my TAM classmates runs a wedding venue in Germany, which that's just so cool to me that like he gets to live in his hometown in Germany and have this amazing business that he runs and with his family, and it seems really cool. So you can also do teaching, do academia. A lot of folks do go the PhD research route, and there are colleges all over the country, all over the world that you can work at. In my example, I was a local staff member at some consulates general, as I'll describe a little later on. But especially here in the U.S., those are frequently found in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, and Denver. So if you are interested in working in any of those locations, working for a foreign mission is I think an under-considered career. And it was a really cool experience to get exposure to foreign policy while working for the Japanese government or working for the Czech Republic's government. And, you know, when I was coming straight out of high school in Arkansas, I didn't realize that was an opportunity. And so, you know, that's just an example of kind of careers that you consider that don't follow necessarily the traditional route. You can also work in governor's offices or mayoral offices. I list here two of my biggest career role models. Schuyler, he has worked for the Washington State Governor Jay Inslee as his director of protocol and international relations for a long time. And so I got to know him when I was working in Seattle. And he just has the coolest job. Like, all he does basically is meet with visiting delegations of diplomats, of businesses. He goes to trade shows and conventions and summits to represent Washington State. And it's just the coolest thing. And then Sabine Nassim is the director of the Louisville Mayor's Office of Globalization. So she works to promote Louisville, you know, on a global stage, and also working with Louisville's vibrant immigrant and refugee community there at home. And so those, Schuyler and Sabine, are just two examples of what kind of careers that you can have outside of DC, outside of Brussels, and still be intimately involved on a day-to-day basis with international relations. And then you can also always find work at nonprofit organizations like World Affairs Councils are a great opportunity. When I first finished grad school, my first internship was with the World Affairs Council of Seattle, which was kind of my launch pad into my professional career there in the Pacific Northwest. And there are World Affairs councils all across the country. And then there's also, you know, nonprofit organizations like the Maine Immigrants' Rights Coalition, which is where I'm at now. So that's kind of the segue of taking me as an example. What have I done? As Sarah mentioned earlier, you know, I've worked at a couple of consulates general. I've worked in a couple of U.S. House offices. I've worked in a workforce development board where a large part of my work involved immigrants and refugees. And then when my partner got a job at Bates College up here in Maine, we moved up to the Portland Lewiston area last summer, and I found a job with the Maine Immigrants' Rights Coalition, serving as the advocacy manager. So as I've been, you know, sitting here listening to this conference today, I've also been trying to keep up with the goings on of the Maine state legislature for work, and figuring out what my calendar looks like for next week for bill hearings and committee hearings, and when I need to go to the state capitol to Augusta to testify on behalf of legislation, trying to schedule meetings with our community partners and things like that. And so even though I'm all the way up in Maine, you know, relatively small state, you don't really think of foreign policy when it comes to Maine. I'm still every single day working on behalf of immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers. I'm meeting with state legislators, I'm meeting with congressional staff. I have to keep track of what's going on, like conflicts in, you know, the Congo and Angola, and learn about who are the asylum seekers that are coming here and things like that. And I use, you know, the institutional knowledge that I learned through the TAM program to help me figure out, like, you know, what are the best paths for advocacy, what's the best way to keep track of legislation, things like that. And as Sarah mentioned, around a year ago, I was named a rising leader through the Aspen Strategy Group, and it was really, you know, kind of satisfying, and it was really a really cool accomplishment to see that, you know, I may not work for the State Department, I may not work for, you know, on Capitol Hill, but you know, stories like mine can still get recognized for the way that we play a role in foreign policy issues, even if we live in some place like Lewiston, Maine, or if we work for a small nonprofit organization. And so, you know, how do you find these jobs? A large part of it is networking. And I hate, you know, I'm a bit of an introvert sometimes. I'm not the best at introducing myself to people that I don't know, but it's important to do. And for example, in almost all of the jobs that I've had, I found out about them because I knew the person that I was replacing, or I knew someone that worked at the organization. The cliche is, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And in my experience, that's really true. And so it's really helpful to build your network, to learn who works where. And then that way, for example, in one of the congressional offices I knew the guy that I replaced. He retired, and he was like, "Hey, I'm retiring. I think you could be a good fit in our office. If you're interested, send us your resume, and I'll pass it on to our chief of staff." And that kind of personal connection is so important. Another way of finding these jobs is through social networking. I found out about the Aspen Rising Leaders program because I follow the Aspen Strategy Group on Twitter, and they posted an announcement about it. Or LinkedIn is a really good connection tool. I've connected with a ton of TAM grads on LinkedIn, and just built my network that way. And so definitely make use of things like Twitter and LinkedIn in your job search. And then there's also job boards. There's general public service type job boards like Tom Manitos or Daybook. Sometimes there's really local ones. Like I found out about my current job through the Maine Association of Nonprofits job board. When I found out I was moving to Maine, I was like, well, what kind of work can I find in Maine that involves foreign policy? And so I found out about it that way. And the UNC also has a great alumni association group that I'm a member of. And then there are some international relations specific job boards, but it sometimes takes some effort. And the best way to figure out about all these different routes to get connections is to just ask people that ask mentors. I mentioned my friend Alex that works for Lufthansa earlier. He's been a fantastic resource both in Seattle and Chicago, and helping me navigate, how do I figure out what I want to do? Sarah, for example, I think I've known her for going on 14 years now, as hard as that may be to believe. She's always happy to put you in connection with folks, in your chosen line of work, or if you're moving to a new place, reach out. And the TAM connections that I've built over the years are fantastic as well. Both folks that were my classmates, and then also people that came in classes before me or now after me. So this group here is the group that were in Bath when we were in my second year. And so we were gathered for an American style Thanksgiving in Britain. So that was one of my favorite TAM memories. But just, the connections like that you make that will help you find the jobs as well. So what's next, to just kind of wrap things up, take advantage of your university's career services. I gotta say, I probably take more advantage of UNC's career services now than I ever did when I was a student. They offer webinars about resume help, about how to improve your networking, things like that. So definitely take advantage of UNC's careers or Berkeley's careers. Mind what you post on social media. Employers will be watching. Just a kind of a word of advice there. And keep track of your accomplishments and credentials, even if you're working in retail or entry-level jobs. One of the best job interviews that I ever had, they spent maybe 15 minutes talking to me about what kind of skills I learned when I was working at Starbucks: customer service skills, financial transaction skills, leadership skills, how I was able to train new baristas, and that showed management skills and stuff like that. And so you're going to want to keep track of that. And even if you don't think that working at Walmart or Target is going to help you get the dream job that you want, it might. You never know. And so you'll want that both on resumes and in interviews that you may have in the future. So just a little bit of advice from someone that's about 10 years out now from graduation. So that's all for my presentation. It's a big day in our household up here in Maine. My fiance, she went to Duke, so I had to show the little Duke graphic there, or repeat Duke graphic. But yeah, reach out to me anytime. There's my email addresses. Find me on LinkedIn. Reach out to Sarah, and she'll be happy to connect. But I'm always there, if y'all need any advice or just want to connect. And if you're ever in Maine, feel free to look me up. But Just wanted, the summary is like, you don't have to end up in a career in the State Department or the CIA or in the federal government or anything like that. You can end up working at a nonprofit organization in Portland, Maine, and still have extensive day-to-day work in foreign policy. So keep your options open, and just be assertive and go out there, and you'll end up there eventually. And TAM is a great way to do it. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Tobin. Your story and Lauren's are just fantastic, and we thank you so much for sharing them so candidly with us. We just had Robbie Gonzalez in, and he graduated one of the first classes of TAM, I think in 2000, and he has now had a 20-year career as a Foreign Service officer. And it was really interesting because he was talking about how hard it's been, especially with 2 kids, and has actually made an effort to come out of the travel part of it and spend the last 5 years in DC, and was saying, you need to define what success is for you. And with the Foreign Service, it's up or out, and there's this hierarchy, and with a lot of the ways that we tend to think, there's this preconceived notion. And of course, a lot of the students I interact with want to be Foreign Service officers. That's the dream. But along the way, so many people realize there's so many other paths, and they can be happy in a number of different things. So it's really great to broadcast these opportunities. It doesn't have to be location specific. It's not just one path. It's not like dental school where you're all going to be dentists. So that's what's been so wonderful to see in the TAM community all these years, people going out, and our undergrads too, and doing such different, varied, exciting things that you're clearly so passionate about.